welcome to another edition of Two
Irish
Guys
discussing
Software.
That's a new opening.
Yeah, sure. We have to try something new this time, you know. Welcome. Yeah, here we are in end of April 2021. We're going to talk about software vendors again, as normal. We're going to talk about the mega vendors, but we're going to look at their consumption habits. And do they consume more than they create is the question we have today.
Nice.
And it's very apt that we have that conversation today because what is it? Earnings season. Yes, it is earnings seasons. The time of the year. Listen, it's been crazy. Look at last year. We had, what was it, 634 billion in acquisition money spent in deals done in 2020.
That's a lot of consumption.
That's nearly double the previous year. So a lot of consumption going on. But we have a great show. We're going to talk about Kyndryl. Hold it. We'll talk about that in a minute. Kyndryl. Whoa.
Sorry, I can't stop.
We're going to have a little bit about IBM earnings. We're going to have a Microsoft story. We've got Google the Oracle. We got SAP, and we have a fantastic guest, Devin Mathews. He's a podcast king. He is the managing partner and founder of ParkerGale private equity firm, and he does a cracking podcast himself called the Private Equity Fundcast. He's a friend of yours, I believe.
He is. I know Devin well. Yeah, been in Chicago numerous times. We've hung out. We went to the Irish versus All Blacks game.
I'm so jealous.
Way back when, can you remember?
Chicago. That was 2016.
2016, yeah. And I've listened to Devin and Jim quite a lot. And they have a jingle as well, which we don't have, which is a thicker one. But yeah, we've had some good times out in Chicago.
Jingles cost money, though. You know, that will have... This is a really cut price version. They're doing theirs since 2014, so we'll give it a miss. But speaking of jingles, actually, I was listening to a couple of their podcasts, and Devin, we'll ask him this later. He called himself they call themselves the traveling Wilburys of private equity. They like their music. Yeah. So I'm not sure. Do you remember the traveling Wilburys?
I do. Wilburys? Yeah. They like their music and their movies and their TV shows. Yeah. So we used to discuss that a lot when we were over there.
What was it? The song "End of the Day" or? You're the singer here. I won't go over that.
Got me on the hop.
Handle with Care, I think, was another one. They had a couple of good tunes. But yes, we've got a great show. We'll talk to Devin in about 15 minutes' time. But yeah, we have to start with me.
We'll start with you.
I just have to start with me. Do you know what's happened to me? I went to London last week for my first trip since March 2020. I've had 6 COVID tests. You're okay. I'm here in the room with you only because I got my 6 tests, and all of them, thankfully, negative.
Well done.
Yeah. So I did a kind of a home antigen test before I did my PCR test before I flew out. That was the first one. Then the PCR test before I flew. Then I had to do another PCR test in London before I flew back, and then I did 2 antigen tests then over the weekend and Monday morning, and then I had another test which I just got the results in the last 2 hours because otherwise I have to do this at home by law.
Wouldn't be the same.
Yeah. So now I'm allowed out and about again.
And you went to one place.
I went to. No, what? To go one place, exactly. Just to go to one place for 5 days. I'm a little bit hoarse because I spent the week talking outdoors. Yeah. And so
it's a positive that you were negative.
Yeah.
You know, as it was said. Somebody said that recently.
Yeah. So
negatively positive or positively.
But you should do it. Travel without the tests.
Yeah, I'm not fond of the tests myself. I had a very poor reaction to the swab or the long earbud being shoved up my nose. I have a very clean nasal passage now, I can assure you. I really didn't like that.
But yeah, no. So I'm good, and traveling is back a little bit awkward. So hopefully next time I travel, it won't be as challenging.
Jesus, but it's really not worth it. It's better to be a prisoner in your own home country rather than traveling.
Well, the news is all coming to us. So before we get into the earnings, listen. We can't.
Man, it's just the company that keeps on giving.
Doesn't it?
I mean, every time we have a podcast, we go, I wonder what IBM are doing. And they have trumped, pardon the pun, everything this time. I mean, we've been talking about new names, or NewCo, since October.
I know.
And we've been watching the appointments of various CEOs and marketing directors and so forth. And we've been wondering, we actually had a conversation about brand recently. And we talked about the brand, brand management and brand damage and all of that. And we thought, what will they do? I mean, I think NewCo might have been better, but no, they've come out with a classic, which actually I had to keep having to write down because it's impossible to remember. It's that modern. But it's
Kyndryl.
Kyndryl. And look, it's been great watching what people have been saying online about it. But let me just give you the definition, just so we're all clear.
Can I just say something before you go there? Because as I was leaving the house an hour and a half ago, I walked down the stairs, and I haven't, because I've been kind of isolating myself in the house for the last few days. Yeah. And my wife Leona goes to me, "Where are you off to?" I said, "I'm going in to record the podcast." Yeah. And she said, "What do you mean you're going in to record the podcast? You're out of your mind." I said, "What are you going to do? What's?" He said, "I said, we have a guest." I said, "What are you going to talk about?" I said, "We're going to talk about Kyndryl." And she's like, "Well, what the hell are you talking about the Kardashians?"
That's exactly what I said.
I kid you that. Yeah. That's exactly what she said to me. Yeah. I was like, "Oh my God."
Well, I actually posted a LinkedIn reply with the exact same. Is it a character from the Kardashians? Yeah. But no, it's not. It's a real name of a real company, apparently. Yeah. That's in the decline. Talk about the decline of the company. But so Kyn, Kyn. Yeah. From kinship. Yeah. Something to do with relationships and people, employees and customers for the first time, maybe. Maybe I get that bit. But the next bit is drill, which comes from tendril, which apparently is supposed to bring to mind new growth and advancing human progress. And you stick them together, and what do you get?
You lost me.
Yeah, Kyndryl. But it's okay, because even though I've lost you, there is a YouTube video that they've had to create to let people know how to pronounce it and what it's about. But there's been some funny kind of commentary on it. Actually, there's a character in the world of Warcraft, which is kind of this adventure game thing, called Kyndryl, spelt the exact same way. Apparently, there's an IKEA product which I couldn't find on the IKEA website, but I hear it's a toilet brush or something related to latrine, which would be suitable for IBM. And there's a nasal spray of a similar name. But we've also got Benadryl. You remember Benadryl?
A nasal spray. That could have been helpful for me.
It could have been. So, but anyway, it's modern. It's hard to remember, but folks, it's okay. There's a YouTube video you can go and check out, and they've really it's fantastic. Yeah.
So you said there's a toilet brush. Well, because remember they named their System Z. Remember we had that with Paul Arnrich a few months ago.
Yeah.
They had to change the name. Was it said System Z because it's a Japanese toilet?
Japanese toilet. So they obviously like stuff to do with latrines and you know.
Yeah,
but anyway, it's brilliant. So best of luck to them.
But on a serious note, that company is, regardless of what they're called, there's going to be serious challenges there. Yeah,
look, they've broken it up, and they broke it up for probably good reasons. I mean, I don't think the breaking it up was a bad idea. We've been saying that you called it actually, I think on podcast number 1 that they'd break it up. But it doesn't seem to have done anything to their earnings. Like looking at what, their Q1 results, they've tried to suggest in some of their commentary that the revenue was up, but actually on a comparative currency basis, they're down 1% compared to 6% decrease in the prior quarter. GBS was down. GTS, which is now Kyndryl, it's down. Unexpectedly, it's down kind of 5.3%. So it's kind of hard to find really anything positive in anything that they ever do in their earnings, right? Yeah. So I'd say it must be very hard for them to go out every quarter and stand up in front of people and say what's going on, because it's kind of pretty depressing. Cloud and cognitive software was up 0.8%, which is pretty poor when you compare it to what's going on in Amazon and Google and Microsoft, who are all boasting 30% increases in year on year, quarter on quarter. To be able to say it's up 0.8%, it must be pretty difficult. So, and as they promote themselves as being the hybrid cloud company, and that's what they're really focused on, they then go and have a cloud platform access issue in the last couple of weeks. Where
what was that?
People couldn't actually log on to the IBM Cloud Console to access their cloud services.
Dear.
So it's got an administrative console that you'd log into to check performance and capacity and all that type of thing. But
you just don't want those sort of stories going out.
Well, not if you're trying to pitch yourself as the hybrid cloud company. So,
dear me. And I see. I mean, those numbers are terrible. I see they've now had to create a new way of generating money.
Well, as they always have, but not by creating anything. I mean, this is purely this is consuming more than they create category if ever there was one. So we know they've been auditing people. We know it's been more difficult to audit people to build up their revenue and to support the declining revenue of the other departments. So they've come up with a remote way of auditing people called RISE. It's interesting name. So remote IBM software evaluation. And basically what this is it's a portal which the likes of Deloitte and KPMG have developed, where customers can essentially self-declare. So they create a portal, the client does all the work, they self-declare, and then IBM tells you how much money you owe them. So
a much easier way to get money.
Much easier way, and you can target smaller companies who've been suffering during the pandemic with the platform as well.
That's unbelievable.
I mean, that's how I read it.
So Rise is like a bit like the ABC, the audit bargain close kind of.
Yeah, it's the
tactic.
opposite of Phoenix, basically. But what I would say though is anybody listening on the show is, whatever you do, always consider your defense here. Don't just sign up and start loading up data files and potentially issues with your ILMT configuration or something. Check what you're doing, defend yourself.
Oh, 100%.
Don't just log in and sign up and start loading up your data. I
think companies know now this is crazy. The audit was a legitimate way of identifying companies who were using software that they shouldn't have been using. But that whole thing has shifted now. In the last 10 years, actually, this is just a money-making racket. That's all it is.
Yeah.
It doesn't stop the entitlement for this, but there's been a lot of pushback on this. There's even an organization that actually, we'll talk about it later, called the Fair Software .cloud, an organization that's set up in France, here in Europe, to look at this around, the practices around audit. Like there really needs to be some change, and we see it actually in the legislative policy of the European Commission, actually, where rules will be made. Like you just see in the last couple of days, they've come out with new rules around the guidelines that are starting to be come out around artificial intelligence, and it's been said already that's where the legal framework, the global legal framework, will start. It's here in Europe, and they're going to look at this. This is a practice that needs to be monitored because it's an unfair monitoring practice.
Yeah. We see it all the time where customers, we know who they are, who get they have an audit, they're told that they owe tens of millions of dollars and it's not the case, and they get somebody in to defend them and it can go down to zero. So it's just malpractice.
That's mad. The other thing I saw, they're going to charge for the weather.
Yeah, well, I saw this as quite interesting, actually, and not necessarily a bad story, because it's actually quite an interesting business. If you look at it, that they bought the weather company 2016, and now they're flipping it. So if you don't want ads, you pay money to get free weather.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm trying not to laugh, but you can get. You can now pay for the weather.
Are you going to invest?
You can pay for the weather forecast, and
we have Devin coming on shortly. We'll ask him: is it a good investment? We'll move on.
They've about 1 million people who've signed up to get the weather forecast for 30 bucks.
I heard they stole. Anyway, the cloud that didn't work earlier. I believe some guy claims that they stole it.
Well, yeah, there's been a lawsuit filed in the federal court in Manhattan. There's a gentleman by the name of Gerald Hayden who has claimed that IBM stole trade secrets and intellectual property from himself and is suing them basically for lost earnings, and he wants a share of the profits from the IBM, we've talked about it, hybrid cloud, and specifically Cloud Pak for Data and the business process platform. So he's claiming that while he was working in another company. He did work in IBM back in the 90s, and he was a co-author of WebSphere, which everybody knows.
Yeah. But
he's worked around the market. He's obviously a very smart guy, and he came up with this business process methodology called awareness to execution, which essentially allows integration between client workflows, between departments. So it sounds pretty smart. And, he deployed and promoted this around the industry, but then he joined IBM and he was told that he should disclose any trade secrets or other intellectual property that he might have developed before joining IBM, and that if he did that, IBM would protect it, and that they'd ensure that no other employee would use it without his permission. And that's what they did. No other employee used it out of position, but they used it without his permission. And according to the lawsuit, so he was moved, A2E was moved around IBM, utilized to drive new business, and then poor Mr. Hayden was shut out, and then he was eventually fired.
How much money is he looking for, did they say?
Well, if he's looking for a share of profits from IBM's hybrid cloud and their Cloud Pak for Data, that could be
very little.
Very not a lot.
Speaking of very little, then come on, give us some. Yeah. I see we're in earnings season. Who's had some earnings? We've had Microsoft.
Yeah, Microsoft. There. I mean, we can never find bad stories about Microsoft. There's one coming, but they've had some fantastic earnings. They've posted a 90% increase quarter on quarter.
19.
But actually, it's the biggest quarterly increase since.
Still 19 for that size. It's huge.
18% since 2018. Yeah, it's the biggest quarterly increase the company's had. They've posted earnings of nearly 42 billion. They're nearing a $2 trillion valuation, and their shares are up 18% year to date compared to 12% for the S&P. So everything's going well. Their Teams chat, the Teams which we use, the Teams for chat, and is 145 million daily active users, up from 150 million. So that's going from strength to strength. So mostly positive. They've also had the largest acquisition of the year so far that I could find, which was they acquired the Boston, Massachusetts company Nuance for 19.7 billion in an all cash deal. Not too bad. And so they were founded in 92, and it's conversational AI technology. So that's the biggest acquisition of the year so far.
They had a bad story though. I guess as bad as we could find. A company in the UK, Value License, have taken them to court. They're suing them for 270 million. So these are guys, I don't know whether you may remember, you remember this, the Usoft v Oracle case going back. Back in 2012, the European Court of Justice made a ruling against Oracle in favor of Usoft. This is a small German company who were basically selling second-hand licenses, Oracle licenses on the market. And actually ruled in favor of Usoft. So actually that opened up the market. So you got guys like Value Licensing, and we would have met companies like Soft Corner in France, or Relicensing, who are kind of around Germany and other parts of Europe. So it's only within Europe. They're actually taking a lawsuit alleging that Microsoft is using anti-competitive practices to get companies to give up their licenses in exchange for discounts rather than selling the licenses to companies like Value Licensing. So they're actually trying to shut them out of the market.
Yeah, they're saying they're using their size and that they're pushing customers, I believe.
Listen, do you need to do that with 19% increase to the sort of money? Like it's perfectly legal to do what they're doing, and they're just creating bad press for themselves. I mean, God knows we look hard enough for bad press, but no.
It's unethical. It's anti-competitive. They shouldn't be doing it.
It's as bad as that ABC audit bargain close. It's like the restrictive practices, and it's also like, you look at the companies. This is the issue with many of these big companies. They're constantly looking for ways to manipulate the market. They're manipulating their customers as best they can. And actual fact, they give an awful support. You know what I mean? There's if you look at the support model, I mean, the business we're in, you've got organizations who are in the business. There's a trend to either offshore, near shore, or never answered the phone. They just don't want to get involved in it.
That's Geordie Shore.
But so, and there's a lot of stuff happening. I mean, looking at the kind of legal landscape as well. You're looking at, I don't know whether you saw the Oracle v Google
very
Supreme.
Interesting.
So in beginning April there, back at the beginning of the month, they had Google were successful. Final decision. They're legally allowed now use the Oracle Java API code to build Android, which totally protects the market, which allows a level of innovation to be fair. 6-2 decision by the Supreme Court. It said Google's copying of the API to implement a user interface, taking only what was needed to allow users to put their accrued talents to work in a new and transformative program, constituted a fair use of that material. Critical, fair use.
Yes, sounds reasonable.
Yeah, totally. And ultimately, this overturned the previous federal decision that found in favor of Oracle at the time. So I think this is actually very interesting. But one of the interesting things you probably heard afterwards, what Google then decided, we're going to move off Oracle, SAP.
Yeah, not connected.
But the thing was, they said they'd do it in a few weeks.
Wow.
Have you ever heard a transformation project from Oracle to SAP take a few weeks?
Never. They must be using the new SAP RISE business transformation process. That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, look, Google and Oracle have never been pals.
No. And what about SAP though? Then is that going to help SAP's numbers?
Yeah, look, SAP's earnings are a bit of a damn squib, to be honest. I mean, nothing. I was reading them with not a huge amount of interest. They're up 2% year on year. The only thing that actually was of interest in the announcement was that the Klein hit back at Larry. Do you remember in Oracle's last earnings call?
Oh yeah, then we talk about the last podcast.
So it's a 45-minute earnings call. He took a third of the earnings call, reeling off a list of customers that he said that Oracle had won from SAP. So the only thing that was interesting was what would happen. What would SAP say? So Klein hit back at Oracle saying that the claims were unfounded, and he said it was a positive sign that one of their competitors spent so much time talking about SAP on their own earnings call. And then he went on to say, we went through their list and check their claims. Now, he didn't say we went through the list, checked their claims, and we found them to be false. He just said we went through the list and checked their claims. So, in the ongoing spat between the two, it's quite funny, actually. But
yeah, well, Larry's okay. Did you hear he bought a nice house in Florida? Yeah. They were asking 79.5 million for it. So he said around 80 million,
lovely.
I don't think he's got much to complain about, really, fortunately.
No, first world problems there.
Sadly. And do you know what? This will be a very good time to bring Devin in. Devin, are you there? Are you still there? Hopefully you haven't fallen asleep. Devin?
I'm still here. I am still here.
Excellent.
I shut off my video because my feed was a little choppy, but you don't need to see me. I think my deep radio voice will be just fine for this.
You have that voice. Apparently, it's a voice that gets recognized at airports, I believe. I hope you didn't mind me.
Only in Copenhagen. No, only once, and only in Copenhagen. I think there may have been some hash involved.
It's still a good story. I can't believe, actually, you're actually a history of art major. You're active in non-profit activities with Three Walls in Chicago, and you know the tech industry, and you like music. I hope you didn't mind my traveling Wilburys description. And you're a podcast expert, really.
Well, I'd say a podcast veteran. That doesn't, just because you're a veteran doesn't mean you're an expert. But yeah, I like underdogs.
Yeah, I was listening to, to be fair, your private equity fundcast, and I know absolutely nothing about private equity. Well, I think I know a little bit more, having listened to some of the podcasts yourself and Jim do. But I was listening to one or two of them that you've done specifically on some of the, where you've talked about some of the older tech companies and legacy tech companies. There was a conversation between yourself and Jim at one point where you were talking about what happens to some of these big companies. And this is something we talk about all the time. And the topic of our podcast today is about the big companies. Is it a fair argument to say that they now consume more than they create? And that's part of the cause of their decline. But one of the things that resonated with me was a comment you made to Jim when you were talking about the decline in, I think it was digital or DEC at the time. And, trying to explain what happened, you mentioned that you said brushes with death, as in the death of a company you were talking about, happened because of a lack of imagination, not a lack of opportunity. I just thought that resonated really, really strongly with me, and I know with Brendan as well, because that's what we talk about a lot. I know we do it with a tongue in cheek here, but we almost cringe with the number of times and the things that these big corporations do, where they just miss the goal. Is that what you meant by that, or what did you mean by that? Can you remember saying that?
I don't remember saying it, but when you have a lot of volume of talking, sometimes something good comes out.
Good one.
Now that you play it back to me, I'd say I'm glad I said it. It sounds profound. It's well phrased. So definitely, the writer's room punched it up a little bit before I read it. Yeah, I think it's true, right? So, as you're talking about, I'm trying to think of why does that happen over and over and over again in the tech world? And you think of the tech world, you basically, if you bought a factory, like a widget factory, and what we do here in the States is we buy software companies and fix them up, which has been going on for a long time. In private equity, it used to be you buy industrial companies and fix them up, or service companies and fix them up. If you bought a widget factory, in the 5 years you owned it, say, as a private equity firm, you wouldn't have to tear down the widget factory and rebuild a whole new one in those 5 years. Maybe you'd add another line, or you'd add another shift, maybe expand the widget machine so it could do 10,000 widgets an hour instead of 2,000. But in software, you basically have to burn the place down every 5 years and start over, and it's really hard for big companies to do. It's harder for big companies to do with kind of the short-termerism in the public markets. So a big public tech company is under a lot of pressure to deliver, 89 days from now. And then you get 1 day to breathe and do your earnings announcement, like you guys talked about earlier. And then you got 89 days to go prove yourself again. And then you have management teams that are compensated for stock performance versus, long-term performance, shareholder value versus stakeholder value, share buybacks used, the cash used to buy back shares to pump the price rather than to make acquisitions or to give investors back their money. I mean, I think that all goes into these CEOs and management teams of big public software companies are in a really tough spot. I think it's great to be public and, Facebook fought it for a long time and they've never thrived more than when they were public. I think, you're seeing it more. Tech companies are going public more and more. I think there's more positives than negatives. But when you get big, like what's the incentive for Oracle to burn themselves down and to just build themselves back up? So they kind of miss the opportunity. And they're not that imaginative, right? I mean, Larry Ellison owns islands and stuff. So like, what's the motivation for him to go do something super innovative rather than just use this capital to buy innovation?
Yeah, no. And at what point does that happen then? Like, it sounds to me the story you're saying there, Devin, is that big organizations at a certain point in time, as entrepreneurs, we have a company that's fast growing, where our goal when you start out is to create a product or a service that you can bring to the market. So it's about creating something. Is there a point is it inevitable that at some point in every company's journey that it is no longer able to do that, and actually its only way is to go and buy other products, and to add value is how clever that acquisition is, or how clever it maybe seems as opposed to actually is? Is that what happens?
I want to say yes, but Jeff Bezos at Amazon's proved that wrong. He created a narrative. Well, he created a narrative 2 decades ago that he wasn't going to be wildly profitable. So the investors that selected into Amazon didn't require massive profits. They let him reinvest those profits into more interesting things, right? So we can have lots of fun at Jeff Bezos's expense, but he reinvented that business many times over. And then AWS, if it was its own separate company, would probably be one of the 10 most valuable companies in the world sitting inside Amazon. So you look at Microsoft and Oracle, and I used to cover the industry as a stock analyst 25 years ago. Jim worked for Digital. He worked for Oracle. We've kind of all been observers of these big tech companies, or for Jim's purposes and for everybody listening who doesn't know who Jim is, Jim Milbury is my co-founder and a longtime CTO. So I look at the investment side. He looks at the product development side when we make an investment. Also famously fought Tex Cobb, who, if you've ever seen Raising Arizona, a great Coen Brothers movie, he was the motorcyclist of the apocalypse. So Jim fought him professionally and lost, but they did. There wasn't just a barroom brawl. It was an actual fight for a medal or something, or a pin. I don't know what they give fighters in the 80s. So we've been inside these companies. We've seen it. So no, it's not. I don't think it.
When you say fighting now, Devin, was he boxing, as in Queensbury rules?
Yeah, no, like kickboxing. Oh. Jim paid his way through college kickboxing. He learned how to fight in high school because he was in a gifted program of a very large Boston high school where he was getting beat up all the time, and he decided that he better learn to defend himself. And then he used it to pay his way through college because his parents were fresh off the boat Irish in Brockton, Massachusetts, and they weren't saving a whole lot for college back in those days. They were distracted with other things. He needed to get his way through college. Yeah, so I guess it's not, it's the exception. Amazon's probably the exception, not the rule. But if I thought harder about it, there are probably exceptions of companies reinventing themselves. Oracle kind of birthed NetSuite and then obviously bought NetSuite back in house. As that innovation. I don't think so. But they also say Oracle, the hardware Oracle software runs on best as the overhead projector. So
yeah, still, I'm not sure how true that is anymore, but because the overhead projectors are hard to find. I want to ask the question. You talked about Jeff Bezos maybe being the exception to the rule, but he stepped down as CEO now, and there are people out there who can be the exception to the rule, but when he's gone off the stage, perhaps Amazon will just resort to type.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Well, everybody gave Tim Cook a hard time when he stepped in for at Apple, and I think Tim Cook's, from what I can tell, he's done a phenomenal job with that organization. It's been good timing, but everybody thought Apple was on the decline when he stepped in. So I think it could happen. He picked the right guy, right? The guy who run an AWS to run it. I mean, that organization also appears to run on it runs like a Swiss clock. He's put management systems into that organization to help it run the way it runs. So I think I'd probably long Amazon. I think it should be broken up but I'm long Amazon. I think the Bezos family is like, if you want to look at Bezos, look at his wife. I mean, his wife is giving away all the money and making the world a better place. And Jeff's trying to get himself to Mars somehow while he becomes bionic. I mean, if you look at his physical transformation over the last 20 years, that's probably more impressive than Amazon's transformation. He went from a nerd quant hedge fund guy to the Terminator. It's an impressive for me as I turn 50 in a couple weeks. Like, oh, okay, I too could increase the size of my neck by 50%.
Well, if you have to go to Mars, you probably will need a neck that size anyway. That's for sure. But it is interesting to see what's going to happen there, because we'd like to, if I bring the conversation just back to IBM. I mean, IBM has spent most of its growth projection activity for the last 15 years buying companies, buying software companies, buying technology. I mean, they bought Red Hat there for $34 billion, I think it was. Yeah. In 2019, they are now though at a point where they're actually breaking things up. I mean, you see Dell breaking up VMware, separating VMware out. You got IBM separating out their a business really that's tanking. I don't know if you know much about their managed service business. This is their long-term big contracts with big organizations where they outsource the operational side of the IT function. Increasingly, they're not able. From what we can tell, our own anecdotal evidence is that they're unable to compete. They're separating it out to allow it to have some sort of life on its own. But it's declined from over 20 billion, 25 billion, I think it was, plus a couple of years ago to sub 20 billion at the moment.
We got to 40 billion. At one point.
Yeah. So it's been a huge company, but it's been massively tanking over the last couple of years. It's obviously been dragging down the revenues. That's why they're trying to get rid of it. But they have many parts of their business that are just standing still. So that's what happens. They grow to a size through acquisition. The acquisition starts falling apart, and then it seems that they just said, right, let's break this up. And it's like the opposite of the previous engineering they did, isn't it?
Well, I think show me results, and I'll show you the incentives that drove those results. So I think a lot of this has to do with the incentive system for management. You've got relatively disengaged public company boards who are scared of their own shadow, right? They don't really act as a check on management. You have management teams who are incentivized for stock price performance. You've got these companies that just spew cash, and they don't want to have dividends, right? Because they're trying to be growth companies, and growth companies apparently don't pay out dividends. So they do share buybacks, and they use the cash for acquisitions because, you hire a new head of corp dev or you hire a new CEO, and how does he differentiate himself or herself? Let me go do a big acquisition. I think a lot of these big companies would have benefited from antitrust enforcement, stopping them in some ways of getting bigger. The American way was breaking up monopolies. We've been doing it for hundreds of years, and we've gotten away from that in the last 30 years. Of stopping these big mergers from happening. And I think so it's like the meaning of life, when the guy's just like, the Monty Python movie, where he's just like, he wants a wafer thin mint, and he has that last mint, and that's it. And he blows up, spews all over the place. There's a lot of that in M&A, and tech M&A is now the next big thing. I mean, it's shocking that the DOJ in the United States has allowed some of these mergers to happen. There is an undercurrent of populism, and that's kind of being translated as like, let's go after big tech. I definitely don't agree with some of the underpinnings of that movement. We can get into a different podcast, but I do think big tech probably should be broken up. Facebook should not own what it owns. Amazon should split itself off from AWS and on down the line. I used to cover Intuit a long time ago, the tax accounting software business in the United States, and Microsoft had a product called Microsoft Money, and nobody used it, but they gave it away for free. But it was typical garbage Microsoft product. And they tried to buy Intuit, which was a public company at the time, and was relatively small compared to today's size. And the DOJ blocked it because they thought it was anti-competitive that Microsoft would own Microsoft Money, right? Which none of these listeners ever even heard of that product because it was such a bad product and nobody used it. And they wouldn't allow them to buy Intuit, which probably at the time was, less than $1 billion merger would have been, I guess. I'm guessing, but it was tiny in comparison to what's going on today. And, the fact that happened 25 years ago, and today, We just watch as these huge companies gobble each other up and think what's bad for consumers at the end of the day, it stifles innovation. At the end of the day, it's bad for the companies that are doing the acquiring because they're just getting bloated and less nimble.
Yeah. I think your observation around the antitrust, the breaking up of companies in the past being really good for innovation is very apt, to be honest with you. I don't know why there's been such a reluctance in the recent past to not do that. I do see a glimmer of hope, and maybe I'm wrong here. I'd be interested to get your view. I mean, there is. I'm sure you're familiar with the House Antitrust Committee. There's a chair called David Cicilline, I think is his name, who's the chair of that committee. And they've had, obviously, as you probably have seen on the news, they've had all the major, the big tech, the Facebooks, Apple, Google, in and Microsoft in there to explain themselves. It does appear that they're taking an interest, but I don't know whether is that just all on the surface and very little will happen. Do you think, or do you think that potentially there will be action taken, regardless of the motivation?
Yeah, I mean, have you watched those hearings? They're embarrassing how out of touch these lawmakers are with technology. I mean, they don't know the difference between Android and iOS. They don't know the difference between a Samsung phone and an iPhone. It's really embarrassing to watch these old farts not even be able to have a rational conversation. It's truly embarrassing for us. That's one. Two is Google has more lobbyists in Washington, D.C. than there are U.S. senators. They have more than 100 lobbyists on staff than there are senators. So you just can't compete. The senators and the House reps, are a joke. When it comes to this stuff, we're basically hiring Twitter personalities to run our government rather than people who care about policy. So I think what's going to happen is don't pay attention to the jokers in Congress. Pay attention to the Department of Justice. Merrick Garland, who he's hiring for their antitrust group, are people who literally wrote the paper on how to break up big tech. Okay. So he's hiring people who are in the DOJ. They've hired people in the last few months that are literally the thought leaders and academic paper writers around the case for splitting up big technology companies. And I would say, for me as a tech investor who wants more innovation, more competition, we think it's better for customers, consumers, all that stuff. So, I'm talking my own book here as an investor is I think I look to the European Union. I think, we follow them. They're coming after Google and, the US will come after that. They'll come after Amazon. We'll follow. So we're not the leaders here globally. Actually, the European Union is, and I'm rooting for the European Union to make stringent regulations that they have to follow, and then they just bring over to the U.S. because it's too hard to operate in a dual track system. They should just operate the same way across the U.S. and the EU.
Yeah, no, I agree. There seems to have been a shift in from a regulatory perspective from the US to Europe, even though there's probably more cooperation from the Biden administration than there was under the previous administration. But yeah, for sure.
I mean, the Republicans in the US are trying to be populists, like, oh, we're for the worker. Oh, but don't raise the minimum wage.
Yeah.
And so they're trying to be Republicans have been the friend of corporations until recently, right? If you look at the guy named Tom Cotton here and Josh Hawley, two Ivy League educated rich kids who pretend to be men of the people. So always worry about that. Josh Hawley went to Oxford and taught at one of the most prestigious prep schools in America, but he's apparently a man of the people now. So you see a lot of this going on. And then the Democrats, they were historically more tougher on business. They're going to be a little tougher with some taxation, which is probably warranted. They raise so much money from the CEOs of these companies now because of the social agenda, which is, I subscribe to, but they're scared to go after them for that way. So you've got a bit of a stalemate. The Republicans aren't serious about it. It's just to win votes, not to actually do anything about it. And the Democrats don't want to do anything about it because it's how they raise money. So it's a little bit of a screwed up here in America, but what did Winston Churchill say? America does the right thing after they've exhausted all other options.
Yep, that's where we have faith that it will happen. Yeah, for sure. One other topic I was keen to chat to you about and get your view on, Devin, is when we look at all of the mega vendors in the software world, the traditional enterprise software players, actually, despite the joke of the overhead projector with Oracle, they have some very good products, whether they made them themselves or brought them in. We look at the IBM portfolio products. There's some excellent products, but history we've surrounded ourselves, if you look back through history books of technology companies, and I think yourself and Jim spoke about this as well, right? The best tech just doesn't win. It's not about having the best technology. Sure, it's not. Regardless of how good that technology is, look at Microsoft's success. I mean, their technology is an awful lot better today than it was, but we Control-Alt-Delete is still the best solution to a Microsoft problem, and yet they're the biggest software company in the world. Even over the years, you've been in tech for a long time. You must have seen so many companies with cracking technology just couldn't get there.
Well, it is. It's good to be an investor in tech when the big guys can't innovate, because you innovate, and then venture capital in the United States is outsourced innovation for big tech companies. Just like it has been for pharmaceutical companies for a long time, right? Like Pfizer didn't create the vaccine; they bought it from a German startup, basically, right? So they're not innovators; they're resource allocators, and I think that tech companies are following a very, very similar path as the pharmaceutical industry. So that's good. So that's good. I think that's good for investors and for startups and for entrepreneurs like you all, because you can innovate, and there's probably a home for your business at a very attractive price for the owners. Probably not a career path for the employees that stick around afterwards, because who wants to work for Oracle or Microsoft when you can work for a more nimble organization? So I think that's going to continue. And I think that's generally a good thing for investors and entrepreneurs, because there's home for these businesses. Yeah, but I don't think people look to big tech for innovation anymore. Satya Nadella, like I'm not a close Microsoft watcher, but Satya Nadella coming in and kind of bringing consumer into the enterprise, I think. We see it in our own portfolio. We buy old software companies and fix them up. The expectation that Apple and kind of pure web-based, cloud-based companies have created for the enterprise is that user interface actually is very important. So the expectation is your enterprise software should work like the app on your iPhone, or like the best Ajax website you go to that's that adjusts your phone size and form factor and all those things. So the pressure on the enterprise to innovate from a user experience, user interface, I don't think a lot of people care what's behind the covers, but those covers need to be quite pretty. And new buyers, as 20-year-olds become 30-year-olds and now have budget to buy stuff, you can't show up with a crap user interface anymore, and it better work really well. And you've got like 20 seconds on the demo to impress somebody, or they're going to just move on to the next thing. I think Microsoft's figured that out. I'd say their acquisitions they made into the Outlook suite, so calendaring and some other email stuff they've bought. I use Outlook on my iPhone. I think it's great. I think the G Suite is garbage. It still is garbage. I use it all the time, and I still can't figure out the user interface. I think actually, Outlook, Excel, PowerPoint, Word have come a long, long way, and they work great on my iPad. They work great on my desktop. They work great on my phone, and they're all integrated behind the scenes. Like, I think that's a great example of how an enterprise as big as Microsoft with new leadership and a new approach can innovate well. Not their bulk of their revenue, a lot of their earnings for Microsoft coming from that, but I think keep an eye on what Microsoft's doing. I would look at them as one of the more innovative old tech companies out there. And I think mostly that can be at the feet of Satya Nadella. I think he's brilliant.
Yeah. But they're an outlier, really, aren't they? And I think if you look, I think we're looking at the David versus Goliath stories. David still is a lot nimbler and is able to do things faster. And that's great. And the business you're in is about helping David have a nice exit along that journey. So I think it's what you.
We just put David in some lifts,
Yeah, exactly. I love it. Yeah. You do a great job.
Made him an inch or two taller. He doesn't, he's never going to be as big as Goliath, but if he can present larger, it's like when a bear is attacking you, you're supposed to like make yourself look bigger. Yeah. Or just run faster than your fat friend, and you'll be fine.
By the way, Devin, if Jim wants to be a David versus a Goliath, we sponsor an up and coming light heavyweight boxer. If he wants to get into a boxing ring and try the Queensby rules instead of his feet, Madison Square Gardens, maybe when things get back to normal. We get Tony Brown is our boxer here out of Ireland, who's hopefully gonna get all the way to a world championship belt. We're hoping, and
I think Jim had his last fight.
Well, he broke his foot doing jumping jacks, so that kind of curtailed his his fighting lately, and having a kid at 56. I think having your first kid at 56.
Brilliant. Devin,
another good Irishman on our team. He's like 145 pounds, and he fights. So we're out scouring the middle schools to find somebody who can fight at his weight class. So he'd only fight 12-year-olds, really. But he's one of those scrappy little Irish guys that you're most scared of because they don't feel any pain and they love to get punched. It's the big guys you're not that scared of. It's the little scrappy guys that I'm scared of most.
No, those skinny little scrawny guys, they just keep coming,
Well, it's like the Brad Pitt character.
Their bones, they hurt.
Yeah, it's like the Brad Pitt character from Snatch, right? Yeah. So it's like that's Milligan. He's sneak up on you.
Yeah, he hit me with a surprise left. You know that line?
Devin, listen, it's been great chatting to you. Thanks so much for joining us. You opened our eyes to some really interesting things there, and particularly, actually, I like your observation around the department. What's happening in the Department of Justice in the US to see what's going to happen with big tech. We'll keep a closer eye on that. Maybe we're looking at the wrong things.
Yeah.
But thank you for that. And listen, we'll keep posted on your connected with your podcast yourself. And thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much. Hopefully I gave your listeners some ear candy for this episode. And when it's all safe and sound, we'll see you back in the States. And 100% for sure, we'll be back in Ireland as soon as it's safe and legal.
Yeah,
good stuff. We'll go to a wet pub when you get here.
For sure. Brilliant. Oh my God, that's it.
That went quickly.
Another podcast, another month done. Sunshine is getting better. It'll be May. It'll be May soon.
We might even get to travel without having to get swabs and nasal injections or whatever it is.
Don't worry about it. It's easy. Great. We'll see you, everybody, in a month's time.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Thank you from me.
And thanks from me. And thanks to Devin.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.